Today, we are joined by Justin Fanelli, Chief Technology Officer for the U.S. Department of Navy and Technical Director of PEO Digital. Justin's impressive career spans roles as Chief Data Architect for Defense Health, Technical Director for Navy Manpower and Personnel, and Service Chiefs Fellow at DARPA and Chief Systems Engineer for Command and Control. Beyond Justin's government service, he teaches at Georgetown University, has lectured at institutions including Harvard, Dartmouth, and Penn, and recently delivered a TED Talk on innovation adoption. He's a recognized thought leader, having received numerous prestigious awards, including the Federal 100, Defense 50, and the Secretary of Navy's Innovation Award. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into the technical aspects of your work, I'd like to give our listeners a sense of the person behind all the impressive titles. Can you share your personal journey to becoming the CTO of U.S. Navy? What experiences have shaped your path into defense IT leadership?
Sure. I think being around interesting people like you, I find a lot of commonality in this, and it's really just contact living. And so there are some people who've charted out a 40-year plan, and then there are others who, what I find more often are gravitated towards hard problems or gravitated towards people who are in the trenches and want to be challenged and want to work on something that is impactful. And so I would say that I'm more in the camp of I have been navigated by awesome teammates, awesome leaders, and incredible and at times daunting problems. And the path has kind of appeared Indiana Jones style, sort of one step at a time at times. Other times it's a little bit clearer. There's some running room. But what that's looked like was going too far back. When I was 16, we all have our plan. And then when I was 17, I said, oh man, my plan does not include enough service. And so I joined the Air Force, and they told me electrical engineering is what they needed. And I already liked STEM. And so that was not a class I had, not a book I had read in that subject matter to that point. But we went in, and then 4 years later, came out. And so the electrical engineering has been a door-opening experience over and over again in terms of just hitting the wave right when it was getting to crest. I think that was probably true before, but my first job was a hardware job, and not long after, software started eating the world. And I really just rode that wave into very different domains, which has been awesome. I would have it no other way. But to switch from Intel and command and control, which was done like one very specific way, and frankly, if I'm given some insights, that's done historically in a way where, like a few people decide for everybody. In switching then to business systems, because I wanted to get more into data-driven decision making, there are a lot more benchmarks, right? And so when there is a more common problem, you have more reference material, and you're forced down usefully a more like a common path, right? And so if we're thinking about unique problems versus common problems versus like eventually utilities on that maturity pyramid, I've gotten to see kind of the top of the mountain, bottom of the mountain, top of the pyramid, bottom of the pyramid, and then the time in healthcare that you mentioned, the time in venture capital, the time in just teaching with students who have had all kinds of different backgrounds. I think I've connected a lot of dots that there's no real shortcut to doing. AI is going to help with a lot of things, but it's not going to supplement individual experiences along the way. And so I've been really fortunate to get those from incredible people for the last 30 years.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that journey with us. It's fascinating to see how those experiences have converged to bring you to where you are today. So Justin, as the CTO for the Navy, the U.S. Navy, you have a unique vantage point on how technology shapes our naval operations, right, and readiness. Could you share your perspective on the evolving role of technology in today's Navy and how it's transforming our capabilities, operations, and strategic advantage in the maritime domain?
Certainly. We have a long storied history of maritime dominance. People look at that and sometimes they look at and they see one block of experience, but the closer we look at anything, we can break it down to the molecular level. And so we've had disruptive maritime technologies over the course of history that have made us much, much better. And I would say that we're within another one of those periods where the positive disruption is upon us, and the ways that we can take advantage of autonomy and artificial intelligence and being a digital Department of Navy, we've learned a lot in the last few years. And what they say about learning by doing is that there's a power laws effect to it. And so something that we did about 2 years ago, and it was happening before that, but something we've done in strides since then is a lot more active learning, where we are approaching a problem with a combination of technologists and operational users and acquisition people or buyers to have that trilingual unit to solve a really hard problem much faster than we historically have. And so the combination of those different backgrounds and experiences all syncing up on language, in my opinion, is the guiding path to fast forwarding us in the future. Everyone here who's listening knows Agile well, and I think largely Agile has those software development roots. But the idea of not following or not waiting for a waterfall process on things like we talk about requirements, we talk about budgeting, we talk about contracting. So many of these efforts, we know they're done in much more compressed fashion in winning organizations than in organizations that lag behind. And so a lot of people have adjusted and adapted to that. And an interesting kind of outpouring of that is if you have adjusted to modern technology, but then also the agile teaming, you are performing exponentially better than something a little bit more standard or a little bit more historical. And so as we've gotten better at baselines and metrics, and we can talk about that a little bit later, it's easier to see the power laws differences.
That's a compelling vision of our technology's role in naval operations. So, building on what you just said about disruptive technologies, and then with digital transformation being a major focus of many organizations, how do you ensure that our Navy not only keeps pace but also leads in this space? And a follow-up question to that is, I'm sure leaders like you, in the defense landscape have had plans, for multi-year plans that we were executing upon. But how do you keep, pushing those boundaries in that first question, but then with the changes that are happening today, in the federal landscape, with changes in tactics and strategy with the administration, how is that affecting you? But with those change, how are you still ensuring that our Navy not only keeps pace but also leads in this space?
It's an easy one, right? So I think the first part of the question was, how do we ensure that we're disrupting ourselves? At some level, every organization needs to do this if the period of time is long enough. It's certainly easier for small organizations or small progressive organizations to do this. Big ones need it too. It's less a part of their DNA. There are fewer conditioned folks to do that because they haven't lived through that as many times, right? The cycle times can be slower. And so part of the question is, how do you find the unleashed people in your organization? They exist in every organization. How many of them and where they are is different, but point is, like, the standard distribution, the normal distribution of unleashed people is, in my mind, very much like geographies. You can find geniuses in every country, in every state. I think you can find amazing people, even if there are pockets of the organization that have done one thing one way for a long time. And so that smoking out of the unleashed people, or people who want to be unleashed, maybe they're not quite on fire yet, maybe they're just flammable, but we spend a lot of time creating avenues for them to find their people, because once unleashed people find each other, once givers find givers, there's a multiplying effect. We know, based on research, that someone who is more stop energy than go energy can drag down a group more than someone who's more go energy than stop energy can rise a group, right? But if you put the unleashed in a tank, oh man, especially if there is some like safety or some a bubble there to let them cook, amazing things can happen. And so we've done that a handful of places. And so from a personnel perspective, the identification piece is fairly straightforward. Second one is, I think there's a lot of anxiety across the world right now, across anyone who's in the digital space, which is pretty much anyone, about how do I hold down the fort on current technology, but then also bring these new things in. So is maintenance and disruption, is that two parts of the same brain? Is it two different organizations? These are open questions. I'll tell you how I think about it. Number one, if you just have the same people trying to do everything, and that exists, this is not an effective approach. So we tried to model this, and we said, hey, what is a sort of a smart framework for making the right thing to do the easier thing to do? And one of the simplest models that I know that just works is the sales funnel. And I know this from my time in private sector, but it's everyone identifies it. And the best part of a funnel is it's wide and gravity takes care of itself, right? You don't get everything in, but there are the cold leads, there's the warm leads, there's the repeat customers. How do we make sure that we're matriculating down the funnel? And so we just turned that on its side, and we said, okay, these are the people who are best at maintenance, and here's what maintenance looks like. Let's simplify that. Let's make that very straightforward. We can optimize it. We can pull some folks who are thinking creatively in there and look at optimization. We can pull some of the ones who maybe aren't good culture fits and let them do some piloting, or maybe even full-time piloting. But if everyone has to live in every horizon every day, we're just not seeing the throughput. And so we've named these columns. We have these 4 horizons that we use to ensure that we are getting through that cycle and getting the most yield possible. And so I'll just name them really quickly. We have Horizon 1, which is production. That's by far the biggest, right? We are doing what we have to do every day, and we are optimizing that. I can show you on ship maintenance or computer delivery what our numbers were last year versus this year and how they're improving. That's an optimization game, right? This is the science of getting 1% better every day. And then there's Horizon 2, where in some cases we're going for 15% improvement. Hey, let's streamline something. In some cases, we're going for moonshots. And those moonshots always, in our case, include industry partners or private sector folks. And so what we're saying is, who can make the biggest difference and what can you disrupt? Now, something that's new is, instead of within Horizon 2 saying, hey, reimagine the world, we are pointing them at a Horizon 1 problem. Either you can help disrupt and divest a current investment, or a current process that is holding us back. So a point of friction. That piece right there, to be able to cycle through Horizon 2 in a standardized and a scientific way, but allowing for the art, we don't have to invent that process. That structured piloting process has produced fantastic results in the last 2 years. I'll give a couple examples later if it's helpful. And then Horizon 3, the top of the funnel, is who are all the groups we could be talking to and who should we be paying attention to? And so we've opened that aperture really wide. And then we also kind of made that a cooperation competition type space. So competition, I think, is what sometimes people call it. But we're saying, hey, where is DARPA doing something interesting? Where is industry, because they have so much R&D now, doing something similar that's interesting? Where is Office of Naval Research play in here? Where does the research and development, the internal research and development, IRAD from primes play in? Where is straight commercial investment that has been applied somewhere else that we'd like into federal? Where can that be pulled in? And so there's just, it's a funnel, but we're doing a decent amount of pulling there, all the way back to the investor level, where we're saying, hey, this is something that is in Horizon 1 that it's just bad. It's causing friction for our customers, our warfighters. And so there are Marines that are consistently complaining about this issue. What can we do about that? Well, there's a gap. Here's the private sector. Here's the commercial offering. And then here is a good idea that has never been commercialized. Some of those startups are now coming to us, or some of the startups that have a good idea, but it's like a few degrees off. We say, hey, we're not going to steer you, but here's some insight into our problem. And then there's some light bulbs and click happening there. So all this to say, that market is a lot cleaner to us in a lot of domains, like cyber, like overall enterprise management, like artificial intelligence, if that's like a set of portfolios that we look at this both vertically, like I had mentioned previously, and then also the horizontal pieces. And so we're applying this type of thinking to both different technology sectors and problem areas. And all that to say, it's much cleaner and easier to analyze than it was before. And I think this applies almost as much to other federal departments, and then even large organizations outside of the government, as it does to us, just based on our results.
That's great. And you mentioned results towards the end, right? So and when so many initiatives are going on, what KPIs or metrics do you use to measure the success of everything that you're doing?
I might preach for a second. So KPIs, KPPs, 120-year-old metric system. They work. When the industrial age came about, we started saying, how do I make sure that this screw holds this amount of weight, right? How do I solve a particular problem, almost implicitly including the how in that problem solving, right? This is good project management. 20 years ago, Objectives Key Results, OKRs, came about, originated really in Silicon Valley, and we've seen this pop up into big success stories where they say, hey, aspirationally, if you're starting something new, or if you really want to disrupt something, what does that look like? How do I stretch myself? And those work. Both of those work for particular problems. I'd say our problem is maybe a common one, but not a perfect fit. What we have is significant known challenges and a lot of different solutions coming from commercial that are disrupting each other, or maybe allowing for trade-offs that are different than what they had been before. And so if we look at that trade space and we say, hey, I don't want to just compare apples to apples, or one vendor or one potential partner against another, who've always sold sort of through the same distribution channel. What if there is a new emerging competitor that comes on, or what if there is a different path? And so I'll give you the example. For military communications afloat, we've historically had, hey, here is our program of record for military satellite. Here's how we connect. Here's how much bandwidth you get. Here's what that looks like. when proliferated low Earth orbit came out, is this a direct comparison? Are we competing? What does this look like? These can be complementary. And so by applying a portfolio approach there, we're saying, how do we compare these things? They have different features. They operate different ways. They come in with different security patterns, but there's advantages in both. Do we go all in on one versus the other? I mean, how often are we not hybrid? How often are we doing discrete path? And so we were looking for a way to balance portfolio management for outcomes. I think there's a common misperception that private sector just makes these decisions based on profitability. And so if we say, hey, what is the best return on investment? That helps, but I think there's a little bit more to the story. And so the question is, what are you trying to accomplish, right? A key performance indicator is so discrete that I think you can, if you don't have the right one, you can lose the forest through the trees. And so I want to introduce a third mechanism of metrics, which is outcome-driven metrics. I didn't invent this, just like the 4-horizon diagram. McKinsey invented that one, and then we tailored it. This one is out of a Gartner book, but I hadn't seen it apply. We hadn't seen it applied as widely as we had. Now, it turns out quite a bit of the Fortune 50 is now using this. It's only 4 years old. But this is to say, we have a lot of different data. We have a lot of like sub-needles. But how do we know if the main needles are actually moving? But we already measure this. That's great. Keep measuring that. But for all of the things that we're doing, let's do some actual macro reasoning on what moves the needle. And so in the comms example, okay, looks like proliferated low Earth orbit moves the needle quite a bit for some of these things. We should have some of that. How much of the budget should go towards that versus something else? Now we have a decision trade space based on operational resilience, which includes uptime, but also if one goes down, can you replace it easily? What's easier to replace? P-LEO or a military satellite, right? What does that hot sparing and switchover look like? Similarly, let's go ashore now. If we're looking at ashore ops, historically, I'll tell you a funny story. Not that long ago, I had one of the major telecom companies call me and said, hey, someone in your organization just put out, an organization within yours, just put out a request for proposal for something that we don't make anymore. And if we don't make it anymore, then maybe no one does. So you might be able to find it, but like you're sending people to eBay to do the overall networking for a base. This is probably not a good idea. I said, okay, let's figure out if that was a cut and paste error or what actually happened there. We were speccing the actual technology instead of saying, here are our objectives. How do we open the aperture? We dusted off the top level requirements. And now, instead of saying, here's the coax implementation in 2024, 2025, what is possible with either 5G or P-LEO for an ashore structure or passive optical networking? Like what can we get out of fiber? What does the cost comparison look like? If we're not looking at just CapEx, but we're looking at total cost of ownership, how do we show that story? And so the longest explanation ever to say outcome-driven metrics, and specifically because this is an alignment problem, what we call ours is the world-class alignment metrics, because we want to be world-class and we want bigger trade-off buckets to make these type of decisions. We're using those instead of KPIs. KPIs are at the base layer, but we want to make sure across a large organization with really big challenges, how do we move the needle in a more significant way?
No, that's great. And just going back to a couple things that you shared about moving the needle, and also when security patterns, when you talk about multiple portfolios that you have to deal with, and one can only imagine the security considerations, that you have to have in Navy and the Department of Defense. So how do you balance those cyber and security requirements with the need for this rapid innovation that needs to happen in the Navy?
Yep. Well, we're in a team sport, so luckily we're not doing anything alone. For a majority of my working career, we've thought of security in terms of trade-offs. Do I want this capability or do I want to maximize safety? And at this point, that is, there are more win-wins than there used to be. And so there's some aspect of this that is a little bit of a local optimization that has, that no longer serves its purpose. And so there are a few places where at the enterprise level, we've implemented significant zero trust capability so that we can be higher performance and secure and adaptable, add new capability in with the right permissions and access right off the bat. And so this is, it's sprint zero on steroids. You know, we are standing on the shoulders of giants, which means that we're not quite at flywheel state yet. We'd like to go much, much faster, but we are not having to bring the whole stack for every problem. And so when you can get to the point where you are now just shutting down legacy tech and legacy networks and putting that into the bin that works better for you, then you're in a good place in the cycle. I think the balancing act is, how do we make it, if we're going to have more partners, if we're going to go faster, how do we make the barrier of entry lower and again make it easier for the right thing to be the best thing to be the easiest thing. And so what I think that looks like at this point is clearer signaling to our partners, clearer checks on the back end. So we have a really good partnership with industry partners who solve that problem. We used to say, hey, we'll try and handhold 18 of you through this process, but it's going to be painful and it's going to cost you $1 million. Second Front does some of this. There are companies who can help that onboarding process so that we can work with you sooner. And so I'd say that in general, the market is mature enough that we are able to solve each other's problems better and take this off the table. This is, at the highest level, this is an example where we kept thinking about it the same way or making minor tweaks. If you step back and change the approach, we have switched tools and now we can go power laws faster, right? There was a constraint. We have addressed a lot of that constraint, and then the constraint becomes either a subset or somewhere else in the process. And so we're going to keep knocking those targets down until this is dumb easy.
I imagine balancing all that, and you mentioned balancing act. So balancing all these priorities requires making tough calls, right? What is your approach to saying no to initiatives or requests that don't align with your strategic vision?
I might enjoy no more than other people, so this is a tricky one for me to answer. I kid. So there's the emotional and then objective, right? And we all have, like our favorite projects. If we can suck the emotion out of our favorite products, if we can suck the emotion out of when we're making decisions, out of the inputs and the activities that we're doing, and shift it to the outcomes, and we have data on the projected outcomes from the different solutions, and there's some integrity to that data, if there's some fidelity to how we've come up with those projections, then it really does drain some of the emotion. What we've found is that if we can get people who are lock, stock, and barrel focused on here is the outcome and here is who we're serving, and here are the ways that we're evaluating this, and we don't change those, we're fairly consistent. The 5 outcome-driven metrics from WAMS are user time lost. We want to give them back their time. We don't want to spend any minutes or hours or hundreds of hours per year waiting on our tools to work. This should be invisible and straightforward. Operational resilience. How do we make sure that from a security perspective or otherwise, it's just there when we need it? Cost per user. And so like, are we getting the value? This isn't to say, let's drive this to the basement, but in terms of how we actually look at, are we spending more than other folks in our sector, other folks solving the same problem? Like, are we pinned to benchmark? Adaptability. Can we shift quickly? How long does it take? Oh, I have to modify that contract to change a piece of code. That's a problem. So whether it's technology or all the way down the execution stack, what is the stopper or starter? And the last one is customer experience. That's the one we got the most pushback on, because culturally, people were afraid to prioritize that. 5 is a good number for us. What I was always told was, hey, if you have one thing you're measuring for, you're probably over optimizing. If you have 10 things, then no one's going to remember those. And so like, what is your ideal state? And so ultimately, if I'm going nerdy for a second, we have a complex objective function to make these types of trade-offs so that we can look at this and say, hey, if I have $1, what is it going to improve? If you can't explain it, you don't even get in the room. And now we can get to the eaches. We can micro focus on a specific trade-off, and then we can evaluate that as an investment, not just a spend. This makes these conversations much more detailed and nuanced, and kind of fast tracks. And so even before there is a discussion, hey, I just want to talk for 30 minutes about that. What are the numbers? You're not even in the same order of magnitude. This doesn't warrant a conversation. So again, the long answer to, we are having more of the conversations we should be having, and we are essentially automating out the conversations that we shouldn't. And so it's a little bit more of like an intellectual wrestling match on, here's the stuff that really matters. Point is, it's much more focused on impact and the data that is associated with that impact.
That's great. So those are some great insights into, navigating the technology landscape, and also, just thinking about outcomes. And I particularly love the 5, outcome-driven metrics that you mentioned. So looking forward, Justin, I'm curious on what's on the horizon, the future of digital transformation in defense. What emerging technologies or approaches are you most excited about that could fundamentally change how the Department of Navy operates?
I'll answer that question, but I want to do it through the lens of these outcomes. And so historically, we've said, hey, here are 14 critical technology areas. I'm excited about the prospect of quantum. I've read 3 books about quantum in the last 6 months, and very exciting stuff, a lot of progress. All technology, for me, even as an electrical engineer, is about, here is the impact that it's creating. Positive, negative, competitive, like utility or commodity. Like, what is the mission and business impact of what you're doing, right? And so here's the reason I'm saying this. It's probably artificial intelligence, and we can talk about that for the next 45 minutes, and I'd love to. Anything that moves the needle on a known problem that we have, we want that. And so what we've done is we've said, hey, here are our 17 critical problems that we want the most attention on. Let's not spec how to solve them. Here are the prioritized technology areas that we're paying attention to, but that's malleable. You tell us if there's something that's not on this list that solves one of these problems, but it comes back to the problems piece. And so if we were there on the ground floor with RPA, and we said, we'd really like to use a workflow here and use our existing tools. And they say, so we had this problem. We said, we have a 270-day backlog on a process. In that 270 days, the inputs, in this particular case, invoices are going to keep coming in. And so we're going to either stay the same behind or fall further behind. One of our new engineers said, why don't we just apply RPA to this? Well, we don't have that on contract. I can spin up a pilot. We got through it in a 3-day weekend. In this particular case, by stepping back and saying, are we using the right tools? Then we can fast forward. And so I will answer. I promise I won't punt forever on here are the things to watch. But what's more important is here are our problems and the way that our budget works. When I teach a class on technology strategy, we say the best way to do this, I know it's a lot of work, but the best way to do this is quarterly budget. And so we're doing the annual and then we're revisiting for adaptability every quarter. We revisit a lot, but in the government, it's 3 to 5 years out. And so the wiggle space comes with either some of these bridge funds or if we can divest something early. And so if we want to get the cycle time down, and here's what we've done, we've said, hey, industry partners, find a technology that not just makes our life better, gain creation, but pain removal. And so pain removal means turn off multiple systems or applications for every system that we add. So we want addition through subtraction. And so where we have opened up our inventory on asset management and said, how many cyber tools do you have? 72 cyber tools. Does that make you more secure than 10 cyber tools? Not if you can't prove it. And so we are looking for significant steel on target and hatchet man type activities on how do we get out of some of the tech debt without negatively affecting our outcome driven metrics. And so that trade space is to say we're open for business on what makes the biggest difference for us. Autonomy is rising. AI that specifically allows us to what we say is like to move faster or expedite the OODA loop. And so how do we like just make better and quicker decisions? But largely, none of this is done without turning old systems off. And so it turns out like if you're looking at this dance, and every organization has this, but how do we work differently or better with our partners? Our partners need to be pretty intimately familiar with what is what we're living with right now and how we can get off of that. And so we need hungry people who understand their technology as well as our technology to help us leapfrog ourselves. That's where we've had the most successful disruptive use cases. When we said, hey, we're going to move to one API gateway instead of 7 of them. Oh, but there are challenges where one is optimized for this and one is optimized for that. Like, okay, we want an enterprise service. So we are going to make trade-offs and go with the best one and then scale that widely. We're looking to do that almost everywhere. And so we'll come back to where AI is not about the technology, where it's about improving how we do digital twin work with manufacturing, where we do execution of repair and maintenance, where we do overall shipyard work better, where we are doing the compute of and the concentration and collation of different sensor integration using commercial so that we can have more insights, that we can take the 7 people who are doing a lot of manual work and fully automate that so that they can do they can spend more of their time analyzing the problem and then get to actionable outcomes and insights quicker. Like that, those are the fast tracks. So look for more requests for action on those based on our prioritized technology list that we're going to put out really soon. And then our 17 DoD-wide critical problem areas.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned AI, a couple of times, right? So staying on that topic, I think we, and the fast tracking of capabilities, I think generally all of us are seeing how much of a positive impact AI can have and will have if done the right way. But, you know, the other side of that is how do you balance the risks of AI, right? So while we see those opportunities, how do you look at risks associated with the adoption of AI in the Navy, and how do you think about responsible implementation for AI?
Yep. So I was recently told that the by a titan in industry that we've never seen a gap like we do right now with how private sector is moving out on AI versus how public sector is moving out on AI. And so there is an activation energy issue for moving faster and applying just more investment and attention and energy towards outcomes there. How do you do that in a balanced approach is part of the question. So I'd say like at the macro level, again, portfolio management comes into play. And so how are we thinking about this? Second is within Horizon 2, if we're looking at risks, if we're working with commercial partners, if we're looking at data aggregation issues, what does that look like? One key piece, as we have sort of like some of these more philosophical discussions, is both for outcomes, but then also security risks. What is the current state of affairs? And so one thing that I think has unlocked a lot of results for us is instead of comparing to perfect and then only moving if we're seeing a order, like a gain of order function type change, we're now saying how much better is this than baseline? And so we're doing the same thing with risks. What does this look like from a risk perspective? What is the risk of not having a government impact level 5 LLM? Well, it means that people might go to a open source or public website and just put their information there. That is a greater risk than solving this problem. And so now we use Nipper GPT and other solutions like this, where if we waited too long, it would actually be worse than just acting. Similarly, as we break down some of these data silos, never waste a crisis, right? And so we are looking at more of this data, getting more outcomes, the opportunity to accelerate on that action, I think gives us better insight than just eyeballing the problem. And so this to say, everything comes back to data and observability. And now that we have more data, I think because we're learning by doing, we have greater insight into our actual risks. No one has a crystal ball, and looking at overarching concerns, it would be better to have something that is working than looking at a problem and saying, "Oh, I don't want to touch this because I don't know what it'll do." That doesn't make you any smarter. It doesn't make you any more experienced, and it doesn't give you the outcomes that you're looking for. And so we had to get wetter and dirtier to have a more informed position. And now that we have people ratcheting up on that, we're getting smarter every day.
These insights and examples really highlight the complexity of technology transformation in defense. Just reflecting on the overall experience, you've led numerous transformation initiatives across different domains. What's one critical lesson you've learned about technology adoption and digital transformation that you wish you had known earlier in your career? And what advice would you give to aspiring future leaders, that are trying to serve like you did in the federal space?
Well, working with people who love to work makes all the difference in the world. I have meetings today till 7 p.m. and then I'll call some of my members of the team and I'll say, "Hey, I don't want to bother you. I know it's the weekend." And they'll say, "No, let's talk shop. Let's get after it." And so just being around the people who are willing to put in the extra energy makes all the difference in the world, because winning takes more energy. It takes stepping back and panning out and not just working harder on the same problems in the same ways. But even if you step back, to get over the hump, it will always take more activation energy because it's at inertia for a reason. And so if we can surround ourselves with senior leaders and executors who just love the grind, then we can become versatilists together. We can learn from each other. But without that compounding factor, it just takes too long.
That's great. That brings us to the end of this episode. Justin, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your valuable insights and experiences. And to our listeners, I hope you found today's conversation as enlightening as I did. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, share it with your fellow technology leaders in your network. We've got more insightful episodes lined up, so stay tuned. Until next time, keep innovating and leading the way. Cheers.